Ladies and gentlemen, in the national capital, in Delhi, only 1 in 5 women are part of the workforce, which essentially means 4 out of every 5 women are not part of the workforce. Delhi, a city where more women than ever are going to college. Why are so few actually part of the workforce? A recent study has found that just 1 in 5 women are part of the workforce. That means nearly 80% remain outside it, while only 21.3 are working. Led by Vedica for Women in collaboration with Young FICCI Ladies Organization and conducted by Nikore Associates, an economics research group, this first of its kind district-level study attempts to find out why women remain sharply underrepresented in Delhi's workforce and what really holds them back. At the first glance, many assume the problem is family resistance. But the data tells a different story. Nearly half of non-working women say their families are supportive, and only a small percentage face about 10% of direct opposition. So if families aren't the main barrier, what is? The answer begins at home. Unpaid care work, cooking, cleaning, childcare is almost universal. The data shows that 79.5% of working women and 85.1% of those who don't work have to shoulder such responsibilities regardless of their employment status. For many, this means a double shift, a full day at work followed by hours of unpaid labor at home. And here's the catch. This work is so normalized that even women don't even see it as a barrier. So where are the support systems? Most women rely on informal arrangements. Only 26.7% women say they rely on family. 27%, in fact 26.7% people say that most of them, women, depend upon informal arrangements, while 26.7% say they rely on family. Around 27.1% say they rely on informal networks. It's just about 7.7% of women that are part of workforce who claim that they have access to workplace childcare. A very critical factor. About 10.8% depend on domestic help, while support from spouse remains low at 10.9%. But then there is a catch according to study. Despite childcare being an important factor, only 4% to 6% of women identify childcare support as a priority workplace policy. The result: women are forced to adjust their careers around care work instead of system adjusting to them. So then, what is it that women want? The study reveals women don't lack ambition. Instead, they want dynamic working hours. Flexibility is the defining factor for women's participation in work. Among non-working women, 20.9% prefer work from home options and 21.6% want flexible hours, followed by health insurance 17.6% and work from home options 15%. In short, women want jobs that fit into their lives, not ones that force them to reorganize their lives entirely, because in most cases their lives are not theirs alone. Perhaps the most critical insight lies in what this study terms a first entry failure. Nearly 3/4 of educated, not working women in Delhi have never worked at all. Never worked at all. Women with general bachelor's degrees are significantly more likely to remain out of the workforce. The reasons women cite for not working are varied. 11.2% say they do not want to work, which hints at multiple psychological factors. 8.4% point to marriage or family responsibilities, and 7.3% cite safety concerns. And 44.5% of non-working women say better connectivity will enable them to go to office. But those who are working are women concentrated in lower paying sectors like retail 25.9% and education 23%. So the bigger picture, according to the study, is not about willingness. It's about systemic misalignment. And even as the government is looking to increase more women parliamentarians, the study recommends expanding community-based childcare like creches, while also formally flexible work arrangements across sectors. But the big standout point, really, out of this entire survey, stunning, shocking to say the least, 4 out of every 5 women that have been surveyed in the National Capital Region, district-wise, are out of the workforce. I'm being joined at this point by Mithali Nikore, I beg your pardon, founder and chief economist for the Nikore Associates, Anuradha Das Mathur, founder and CEO for Vedica for Women, as well as Lloyd Matthias, who's a business and executive entrepreneur. Thank you very much, all three of you, for joining me. A very important topic, some would say a very unlikely day to discuss when so much is happening around the world. But I think any day and every day needs to just reflect on something as critical as this. Mithali as well as Anuradha, both of you were part of this entire process of this survey that happened in the national capital. Mithali, Nikore, let me start with you. What are the big takeaways for you from this point? This is the national capital. This is India's capital. This is a district-wise survey. Stunning facts coming out.
So I think, Sneha, for me, the most special part of this survey is that I'm discussing my own study on your show and not commenting on someone else's study on your show.
You are on this show for this reason, exactly.
So that's always that's always special. But I think what we did when we were going into this, and a lot of this also I would like to credit Aradhana Dalmia from the Young FICCI Ladies organization. She and I initially thought about this, and then of course Anuradha and us also joined hands on this. See, at the end of the day, what were we thinking? We were thinking that here is Delhi, the national capital of the country. There is so much potential here in terms of job creation. There's so much capital from venture capitalists. There's so many startups. There's a thriving ecosystem. Are we really seeing whether women are part of this thriving growth ecosystem? That was our hypothesis when we went into this. We didn't think that we would uncover that 4 out of 5 women in Delhi are not working. So when we did uncover this, we were absolutely shocked. And let me tell you that the way the study has been designed, it's not that we are only focusing on low income segments or middle income segments. We have focused on all the income segments. We have looked at whether these are primarily women with digital connectivity, with at least a basic level of education, and they're not coming in. And what we are seeing is a massive missing middle, because you do have women who are low income, who have a necessity to work. They are in the workforce. And then you have women who are highly educated, who have professional degrees, who have say lawyers or engineers. They are also in the workforce. But the ones who are in the middle of the education bracket, who just have a bachelor's degree, are somehow not finding any sort of employment, any sort of opportunity. And also, for these women who are from middle income households, there is a bigger opportunity gap to actually being in the workforce. Because say if your salary is anywhere between 20,000 to 30,000 rupees, but childcare costs the same, then immediately the math becomes very clear, right? I'll drop out because it's not worth it for me to be in the workforce when I also have to hire a childcare worker at the same price. So very honestly, this trade-off, this opportunity cost is something which is actually driving a lot of women out of the workforce.
I think very important. Anuradha Das come in at this point. I'm of the very firm belief that a journalist is never the story. Journalist is never the story. Journalist is only a medium of telling the story. And yet I have to say this. I love my job. I absolutely love my job, and that's why I'm doing it. And yet possibly couple of times in a week, I think of putting my papers in. And this goes on months after months after months, despite despite having a very supportive family, despite having a very supportive organization, despite loving my job. And it's because we are literally so torn between a full commitment to work and a child who's so dependent on us. And this is interesting, and I'm asking this to you, Anuradha, because this survey reflects just that. Women who have great supportive families, most of these women, there was a time when India would say we don't have supportive families. We don't have the support. Our family wants us to stay back. Our husband doesn't want us to work. Our in-laws don't work. But this survey doesn't reflect that. This survey reflects a very supportive family. There could be different reasons because expenditure is so high, expenses are so high, childcare is so expensive. There's so many reasons, maybe just out of sheer the desire to be wanting to support their daughter, their son, or whoever it is. And yet, you have women not being able to be part of the workforce. That is a very important aspect to talk about, Anuradha.
Yeah, I think it was, like Mitali said, one of the most shocking, statistics to come across. But I think we were also very hit, Neha, by the fact that 75% of those who don't work have never worked. And that leads me, I've spent the last decade working with young women. They're all sort of 22, 23, 24, the people in the program that I run, the young women. And I think while we get a self-selected group, I've always felt that one of the biggest problems is that we don't bring up our girls to believe that they, like the boys, don't have an option to not work. Girls are always brought up with the belief that they have the option to work or not work, whereas boys are brought up with the belief that they just have to, they don't have a choice. And I think that introduces that option. So the going gets tough in every job, the going gets tough in every profession. And given this absolutely massive burden of care that women carry, those folks where you're thinking trade-offs, where you're thinking guilt, where you're thinking responsibility, where you're responding from years and decades and centuries of conditioning, I think the prompt to drop off is very high. What we have always suspected is that once you drop off, it's very hard to come back. So there's a double whammy here. One is that 75% of those who don't work have actually never come in. So entry, and lots of people are talking about bringing women back. Frankly, there's no women to bring back because they were never in the workforce in the first place. So there is a large number of women who are getting educated, but that's because everybody gets a bachelor's degree in India. So you get a bachelor's degree, but you're really being readied to get married. And Sneha, I think the things to notice now, and that's data, it's not anecdotal.
Yeah.
Globally, women are marrying late, women are having fewer children. There are larger and
And
larger
having
number
children
of
late.
yeah, or having children late. And this thing about moving from your parents' home to your husband's home, that story is over. So I think we have to make a very concerted effort. And, Mitali and I were both at this very interesting dissemination of our report yesterday, where we were talking about the fact that we have to figure out a way in which every young woman gets incentivized to at least consider work. Once you've tasted work, maybe it won't be that easy to drop off. And I think there's a whole host of things that are about mindsets. We had a lot of people from women's colleges in our event yesterday. And what is it that women's colleges are doing, that girls are graduating but don't feel compelled to join the workforce? So I think there is no one reason. I think that's the other really big finding.
You
It's a
know,
big medley
maybe
of factors.
maybe
Yeah.
little into the discussion, I would like to bring in a point about the choice. Burdening somebody to say that you have to be part of the workforce is one thing. Maybe having the choice of wanting to be part of the workforce and not wanting to be part of the workforce is also another thing. We're not here to judge those who are not part of the workforce, but I think it's just a question that everybody is asking. Is there something that needs to be done to ensure that more women are part of the workforce? Lloyd Matthias, good evening. Good to have you. Good to see you after a long time. A very simple question I want to ask, and this is, I would like to go to Mitali Nikore as well on this. Lloyd Matthias, look at the organization's perspective and look at a woman employee's perspective, particularly if you have care, if you need to give care at home, which could also mean, say, children, which could also mean the elderly. today's generation, a lot has changed. You also have men doing the same things, but I would say still a lot gets done by the women, more by the women. The truth is, if a woman has to show up at the workplace and do the same job as a male colleague is, being a young mother or a person who's giving care to somebody who is very elderly at home, you possibly are double exhausted. But bring in the fact that if you have to give in flexible work hours to a woman from the organization, how much viable is it every time from an organizational point of view? You know, it's the economics, the business, vis-a-vis keeping merit at first, but with inclusivity. Where is the balance?
Thank you, Sneha. Great to be on your show, and wonderful to be with three very accomplished women. I think it's a great report, and I'm glad that you've chosen to actually talk about this amidst various other happenings. I think two very key points. I think the first point that you make is valid. I think one, the reality that organizations and companies ought to do a lot more to make it easy for women in their workforce. But the more important point that often gets hidden is the fact that organizations that have an egalitarian workforce, which is have a lot of women as much as men, tend to be better organizations, both in terms of their performance and their market dynamics. And I'll give you a story of almost 20 years ago. I used to work with PepsiCo, and Mrs. Nui was the chairperson. And at one of our India ExCom meetings, she posed the question to our CEO then, saying, "Why is there only one lady in the room in our ExCom?" And there was a little bit of a silence. And she said, "Just look at it this way, that at least 50% of our soft drink drinkers are women. In fact, in a lot of categories, women outnumber men. And why shouldn't our workforce be reflective of who we are selling to?" Right? It was a moment of deep introspection. I think every one of us went back and thought long and hard. And I think one is organizations making themselves more welcoming, to actually look at the workforce being a reflection of the society that we work in. I think one aspect. And two is, I think companies have to go the extra mile, whether it's a hybrid work culture, whether it's providing for daycare facilities, whether it's possibly providing for transportation options. I mean, I've seen it across our own country. In Delhi, women are a little more reticent about taking long commutes, just given Delhi's transport being not very women-friendly, so to speak. By comparison, let's say a Chennai or a Mumbai score better. So I think a lot of these issues certainly need to be addressed. Besides, of course, the larger point, I think I've rather called it out, is about the whole sociological perspective. The fact that women don't necessarily feel the need to work. It's very early on, it's like an optional thing. When the reality is, I think all humans have a streak of ambition, right? I'm sure, women in the workforce will feel as aggressive about the work, despite the fact that biologically women end up making compromises. But I think slowly we're reaching a society where, the partner, the male, has to feel as responsible for rearing children as women do. But yes, it is a very, very important debate, and I'm really happy that you've chosen to run this.
Right. Mithali, it's interesting, because according to the survey that you both have done, that the three organizations have been part of, women want flexi hours to work, to be able to decide, juggle between home and work. How do you decide what is flexi hours? How do you decide what is competency, what is performance, when you want flexi hours, when you have possibly the same, the opposite gender who doesn't require those flexi hours for the same post? From an organizational point of view, when the economies are crunching, the fact is also that corporates, workspaces are shrinking. There are tough economic decisions that need to be made. And while the intent may be inclusivity, it's not always the number one.
No, so I completely agree with you, Sneha. That's a very tight rope that, we have to walk, especially in corporate sector. But I think when we look at our survey, there's a lot more beyond corporate sector that we've actually covered, because we've covered startups, we've covered MSMEs, we've covered educational institutions, we've covered health institutions, retail setups.
But I think this is true for everywhere, Mithali, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing which, I want to build on what Lloyd was saying, which is essentially that while there is a cost involved, to retain women, there's also a huge benefit because there are several meritorious women who have very high productivity, who bring very high innovation to the workplace. But then, because of the fact that there is no support system which is provided by the organization, they may drop out. Now, what we are finding is that women are stuck in this sort of thought process of not being able to imagine the support systems that are not available to them. So, for example, when we asked women, okay, what does your husband do? Does he actually pitch in with the work, with the housework? They looked at us and several of them just laughed because they could not even imagine that their husband would actually come
This
and
is
they
the
would
national
pitch in.
capital.
Yeah, the national capital. And they have
But
said
I
that,
thought things
my
are
mother
changing
does
so
it.
much more. I mean, even for
They're
our
not.
generation, Mithali, I would think so many more men are taking part, are increasingly part of the daily chores of the home, from the kitchen to childcare to elderly care. I understand the share may not be, is something that up for debate, but if you're saying that many of them just laughed it out, I think that's a very different picture.
Absolutely. And in fact, many of them, when they say family support is available for childcare, especially childcare, they mean their mothers or their mothers in law.
True.
They don't mean their husband. And one of the things that also came out when we did the consultations with men, because we did want to make sure that we were talking to men as well in some of our, focus group discussions, we realized that men are actually prejudiced and persecuted against in their workplaces when they raise the need to have any kind of leave or flexibility.
I would agree.
So
I think that's a very important point. That's a very important point. We may say that, men are not part of helping their spouse enough. But what's the culture in an organization where a man is coming in to say, give me those flexi hours because I need to back my wife because I don't have the care at home? Or I need to take care, I need to take my so-and-so mother-in-law, father-in-law to the hospital. So what's the culture that we are enforcing in an organization is very reflective. Correct. I completely agree.
So this is exactly what we found, that, men were coming and saying that at the end of the day, we also need supportive systems from workplaces. So when we say flexibility in policies, we don't just mean for women, we mean for everyone.
Okay, Anuradha, very quickly, a very interesting point in the survey, and that is about health insurance. That's very interesting. I haven't come across this before. That out of the top 3 things that women were looking for, one of them seems to be health insurance. What do you take from that?
Mithali, I think you should take that because it's...
Sure. So absolutely. And in fact, Sneha, I'll just quickly comment on that. And this, came in a lot. In fact, in our focus group discussions and also in our surveys. See, what is happening is a lot of the women who are currently working, they find that they need to take longer maternity leaves. They need to take some time off, even beyond the paid maternity leave that is offered to them by their employer. In that period, they're actually not being able to get any sort of insurance. They're not being able to get any sort of benefits from the employer, right? Because they might be going on a sabbatical, or they might be actually moving out of the workforce and then back into the workforce after, say, a year's break or 2 years break. In that time, they're saying, I would love to have an affordable health insurance product. Now, this is the time where, from a policy perspective and from a government perspective, an important insight comes out. The Jan Dhan Ayushman Yojana, which is the government's healthcare, insurance scheme, is well known to women in the low-income communities. They've actually gone for it. But the women in our survey who are outside the workforce are in the middle income and high income brackets.
Right.
They are not even aware that these products exist.
Right. Lord Matthias, let's come to you for possibly the last comment on this debate. Lord Matthias, this is hardly a debate though, it's more of a discussion. Lord Matthias, for a generation that's seeing a very unprecedented development of sorts, the workforce has opened up in ways that it has never before. So many women and men have been trailblazers for this generation. What would you tell organizations as well as families?
I think the basic issue is really organizations have to realize that it's in their interest to have a workforce reflective of the society at large. I think that's one part. And the second, I just want to pick up with the point that both Anuradha and Mitali made, is that there clearly is, at least in North India, a U-shaped curve of participation, right? Women kind of at the bottom of the economic pyramid work out of necessity, and those, of course, were educated and more self-actualized out of careers. I think one important point and one social correction that our country in general and North India in particular has to undergo is to recognize that there's a bit of a, shall we say, a little bit of a social status trap, right? A lot of families see upward mobility. Their upward mobility is signaled by women not having to work. It's kind of seen as a sign of financial instability. I think that's something that requires, that's really not about really economics, but it's the perception that if a woman has to go out to work, maybe the husband can't provide for his family. And I know it's a very, very negative stereotype, but it is true. And I've recognized this very often that we see a lot of drop offs in the middle or the lower middle segment, so to speak. Not so much, obviously, among the more educated and upper income folks, and certainly not at the bottom of the pyramid. I think that's a larger social correction that, as a society, hopefully things will change with a new generation.
Right. Thank you very much, all three of you. Sure, Anuradha, I think you have a comment to make. Go ahead.
No, I think that the what I did want to say was, one, I wanted to take on from what Lord said about the choice to work. And we've started to feel that dignity and dependence don't go hand in hand. And if women want a life of dignity, then we really have to teach our girls from day one that they have to have some money of their own. And that's where that journey towards a career and not quitting starts. So I think we have to start early. And the second thing that I do want to say is that this conversation often becomes about what women need and what women want. I mean, at least I will say this, looking at young people, exactly as women want more in the workplace, young men want more in the home space. There are enough and more young men who would like flexibility. They would like the option to not be this on a treadmill breadwinner from day one till the
I
end of their
agree.
lifetimes,
I agree.
parenting, all of that. So
I
I
agree.
think we are looking to, forces coming from both sides for just a more equal world. And
Right.
I'm very hopeful because I just work with young people, so I see that change starting to happen.